Are you in favor of a wage freeze for state employees as a way of helping to deal with this?
You know, again, and I'm not trying to avoid your question. It's not the controller's
No, I know that,
policy
but,
job.
but what's your opinion?
I think that you need to engage the employees in the discussion of how you can save money. One of the things we did in our agency, we have regular labor management meetings, and we've talked about how can we save some money within our own agency. One of the areas we identified as a high cost is outside consultant contracts. And by bringing more of that work in-house, training our existing employees, we've been able to save money. Whether or not you do an across-the-board reopening of the contract, that's something that has to be determined, you know, by the governor's office.
Well,
what we did do, where it is saving money, and you know where I think it was the right thing to do, was open up a discussion on the pension system in terms of contributions. We administer the system, so we look very closely at the costs. And there's now a new tier on the state level that requires a longer payout on the employee part into the system, limits on overtime in terms of the calculation for the final pension. That was the right decision to make. It happened because management, as represented by the governor, and the unions had a negotiation, had a discussion, and they came up with an effective solution that will benefit in terms of reducing the cost of those pensions. So I think those kind of discussions are reasonable to occur, but that has to be part of a dialogue. It can't be just unilaterally implemented.
Moving forward, when we talk about who's going to be most adversely affected, apparently everybody's going to be affected to some degree. Yeah. But it would appear that those who are just barely clinging on being able to make it will find it even tougher. Do you see an impact on, for example, minorities, Latinos, African Americans, and others who still occupy the lowest tier in the socioeconomic structure of New York State, taking substantial hits that might further push them down?
You know, we did a report that speaks to a part of what you're raising and the impact of the recession in terms of unemployment. And we found that in particularly in the boroughs of New York City, it were those in minority communities that were hit the hardest by the recession, and a lot of it was tied to education level. The lower the education level, the more likely you were the first one to be laid off as a consequence.
Last
of the recession.
hired, first fired.
Well,
to some degree.
It's to some degree,
yeah.
But it's also in terms of qualification and credential and the kind of jobs you would be in that it had an impact. Interestingly enough, our numbers also showed a greater hit as a consequence of that on the male population rather than the female population. Just an interesting, just the way we saw the numbers play out. If you certainly look at access to services, because as a consequence of the recession, more people often need government services. So if you are having to spend less in certain program areas, let's take Medicaid as an example, at the same time that your enrollment in is going up, that could very well disproportionately affect that population. So I do think that the question you raise is of concern, and it really gets to 2 points. Number one, we do have to, as tough as it's going to be, get our fiscal house in order. But number two, we also have to start thinking in strategic ways about how we're going to get this economy to grow again. At the end of the day, we need to not just be talking about where we're going to cut. We need to be talking about how can we make the right kind of investments that are going to start to grow the New York economy once again. That's a harder and more long-term challenge, but I think it's one that we should not lose sight of, even though we have the pressure of deadlines to get a budget in shape.
Another report that you came out with even today, or very recently anyway, regards how the state pays or issues in the state paying the monies that are due to nonprofits. Now, the nonprofits essentially serve the lowest tier of the society, those who have the greatest needs. Yeah. And that would be yet another hit when the government is slow to give them the monies that have been allocated for them.
Yeah, a very important point. And it really speaks to why, I've been saying for some time now, we have to get a budget done that's going to hold together. To put a budget together in April, as was done this past year, on an overly optimistic assumption of revenue, and then within the year having to cut back agency spending, having to delay payments to not-for-profits, as you just point out, It's the same effect as a cut, because if you are told you're going to get this amount of money and you hire staff, you provide services, you put in your voucher to get reimbursed and the money's not there and you have to wait 3, 4, 6 months or you're still waiting into the budget year, it's the same thing as a cut. So that's why I think for planning purposes and to avoid a crisis management mode at the local level, we need to have a budget that's put together in the right way, that will hold together. I hear from not-for-profit leaders all the time, even if the news is not going to be good, at least if I know what I'm going to have to work with and it's real, rather than an unreal number, that then has me make commitments that then you can't help me fulfill. We have to get away from that. The other piece of this, when you look at many of the not-for-profits, very often those who they're working with are often who they end up hiring into many of their programs. So I think when we talk about some of the cutbacks and the impact that it has on that sector, we need to keep in mind that is also a contributor to our employment picture and to our economy, and that many of the individuals who are trying to get into regular employment are often the first ones to lose their positions when these not-for-profits have to downsize.